The pain started as a dull ache in my abdomen in early April. By mid-April it was sharp and constant. By the third week I was in the emergency room at 2 in the morning, vomiting from the intensity. "You have a ruptured appendix with peritonitis," Dr. James Holland said, reviewing my CT scans. "This is a surgical emergency. We need to operate within hours or you're at serious risk of septic shock and death." I was 27, trying to process the word, death, coming from a surgeon's mouth. How long ago did it rupture? Based on scans and symptoms, 36 to 48 hours ago. The infection has spread throughout your abdominal cavity. This is life-threatening. I called my mother. She answered, voice groggy and annoyed. "Jessica? Do you know what time it is?" "Mom, I'm at St. Catherine's Hospital. Ruptured appendix with peritonitis. Emergency surgery in a few hours. I need you here." Long pause. "A ruptured appendix? That seems dramatic. Are you sure they have the diagnosis right?" "Mom, I've had CT scans. The surgeon showed me the images. My appendix ruptured and I have severe infection. This is serious. How did you let it get that bad? You must have ignored symptoms for days. This is exactly like you. You never take care of yourself, then create medical emergencies that could have been prevented. Can you just come to the hospital?" "Jessica, your father and I are leaving for our Caribbean cruise tomorrow morning. We've had this planned for 6 months. We can't just cancel because you need a minor procedure." "Minor procedure? My appendix ruptured. The surgeon said I could die from septic shock." Surgeons always say worst-case scenarios. It's how they justify their fees. You're in a hospital getting treatment. You don't actually need us there. You're an adult. Have the surgery, recover, and we'll see you when we get back in 2 weeks. My father's voice in the background. "Tell her we'll bring her back a souvenir." They hung up. I called my younger brother Tyler, finishing his senior year at State University, graduating in 3 weeks. The golden child. "Jess? What's up?" "Tyler, I'm in the hospital. Emergency surgery. Ruptured appendix. Can you come?" "Oh man, that sucks. When's the surgery?" "In a few hours. They said it's life-threatening." Yikes. I've got my final capstone presentation at 9 this morning. Worth 40% of my grade. I can't miss it or I won't graduate." "Tyler, I could die." "I mean, you're not going to die. You're in a hospital. But if I miss this presentation I don't graduate and Mom and Dad will kill me. Plus graduation is in 3 weeks. You're still coming to that, right?" "I'm having emergency surgery right now." "Right, but that's 3 weeks away. You'll be totally recovered by then. Appendix surgery is like outpatient stuff. Just rest up and make sure you're good for graduation. Mom's planning this huge party." He hung up to get ready for his presentation. I lay there alone and cried. Not from physical pain, but from realizing a Caribbean cruise and graduation party were more important to my family than whether I survived. My best friend Monica arrived 30 minutes later, still in pajamas. She was a charge nurse at another hospital. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The surgery took 4 hours. Dr. Holland had to perform an open appendectomy, not the minimally invasive procedure, because the infection was so severe. They removed my ruptured appendix, cleaned infected tissue and placed surgical drains. I woke up with Monica holding my hand and Dr. Holland beside my bed. "Jessica, you're stable, but that was touch and go. The infection was more extensive than we thought. You'll be hospitalized at least a week on 4 antibiotics. This was very serious. If you'd waited 12 more hours, we'd be having a very different conversation, if at all." My family didn't come. Parents are on a cruise. Brother had a presentation. Dr. Holland's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. What my family didn't know was what I did for a living. I was Director of Human Resources and Employee Relations for Metropolitan Hospital Network, the largest hospital system in our state. 12 hospitals, 40 clinics, 23,000 employees. Every employment contract, every hiring decision, every termination, every staff complaint came through my office. My mother worked as a medical records clerk at St. Catherine's Hospital, this very hospital. 8 years there. My father worked in facilities management at Mercy General, another network hospital. 10 years there. Both were employees in the hospital system I oversaw. I spent 7 days in the hospital. The infection was stubborn, requiring multiple antibiotic rounds. The drain stayed in 5 days. I ran fevers spiking to 103 degrees. Dr. Holland visited twice daily, clearly concerned about my recovery and lack of family support. Monica came every day after her shifts. My HR colleagues sent flowers and care packages. The network CEO Margaret Chen called personally to check on me. My parents sent one text from their cruise: "Hope you're feeling better. The beaches here are beautiful. Beach with umbrella." Tyler sent a photo celebrating after his presentation. "Nailed it. Graduation, here I come. Graduation cap." I was discharged on day 8 with a PICC line for home 4 antibiotics, strict wound care instructions, and orders not to return to work for 3 more weeks. Monica stayed the first 2 nights to help with medications and basic tasks. My parents returned on day 15. They didn't visit. They called once. "We're back. It was amazing. We brought you a shell necklace. We'll drop it off sometime. How are you feeling?" "I almost died, Mom. I was in the hospital 8 days with severe infection." "Well, you're out now, so clearly you're fine. You always exaggerate how sick you are. Remember the flu in high school? This is the same. You had minor surgery and you're making it into a dramatic production." "Minor surgery?" "They cut me open and removed infected tissue from my entire abdominal cavity." "Surgery is surgery. Plenty of people have appendix surgery and go back to work in days. You're milking this for attention because you were upset we went on our cruise. We're not going to feel guilty about a vacation we'd planned for months just because you have bad timing with health issues." "Bad timing?" "Yes. If you'd gone to the doctor earlier like a responsible adult, this could have been a simple laparoscopic outpatient procedure. But you waited until it became an emergency, then expected us to cancel our expensive cruise. That's not fair." "I see. Anyway, we need to focus on Tyler's graduation. 10 days away, huge party planned. You're still coming, right? We told everyone you'd be there. Tyler's your only brother. This is a big milestone." "I'll think about it." "Don't be like that. This isn't about you. This is Tyler's day. You need to be there. We're your family." I hung up and thought about that word, family. 2 days later, back at work part-time from home, I reviewed routine employee files. 2 names appeared: Patricia Morrison, medical records clerk at St. Catherine's. David Morrison, facilities manager at Mercy General. My parents. Every employee underwent annual performance reviews and contract renewals. As HR director, I didn't personally conduct every review, but I reviewed all documentation and had authority to flag any employee for additional scrutiny. My parents' files showed adequate performance. Nothing exceptional, no major issues. Standard raises each year, no formal complaints. But the employment handbook every employee signed included a code of conduct clause. Employees were expected to maintain personal behavior consistent with the compassionate, patient-centered values of the organization, both professionally and personally. I called our chief legal counsel, Robert Brennan. "Robert, I need to discuss a code of conduct question regarding my parents. I want to handle this correctly and ethically." "Go ahead." Both my parents work for the network. 3 weeks ago, I had emergency surgery for ruptured appendix with peritonitis at St. Catherine's. My parents refused to come because they had a cruise scheduled. They called my life-threatening surgery a minor procedure that could wait and blamed me for bad timing. Robert was quiet. "Your parents are medical support staff, and they dismissed a ruptured appendix as minor?" "Yes. They said I was being dramatic. They went on their cruise and didn't visit once during my 8-day hospitalization or after discharge." "Jesus, Jessica. I'm sorry. Does their behavior constitute a code of conduct violation regarding compassionate, patient-centered values?" "That's complicated because it involves your personal relationship. Let me reframe. If any employee, particularly in patient care support, publicly demonstrated this level of callousness toward a family member's life-threatening medical emergency, and that became known within the hospital community, would it raise questions about whether they embody our values?" When you put it that way, yes. Hospital culture is built on empathy and compassion. If staff demonstrate fundamental lack of those qualities personally, especially regarding medical emergencies, it raises valid concerns about organizational fit. So I could flag their files for review? You could. But you must recuse yourself from final decisions. You can flag the concern and provide information, but another HR director makes the final call. Understood. I flagged both files with detailed documentation. Text messages dismissing my surgery as minor and optional. Phone records showing 1 call in 8 days. Witness statements from Monica and Dr. Holland about my condition and prognosis. Summary of their continued dismissal of my medical emergency. I attached a memo. Employee behavior raises concerns regarding alignment with organizational values of compassion and patient-centered care. Recommend review by senior HR leadership. I forwarded both files to Senior Vice President Dorothy Palmer, 30 years with the network, fair but uncompromising about standards. Dorothy called 2 hours later. Jessica, I've reviewed the files. I'm not making this decision because you're involved. I'm making it because this behavior is genuinely incompatible with our mission. I understand. A ruptured appendix is a medical emergency. Peritonitis is life-threatening. Anyone working in a hospital should understand that. Your parents dismissing it as minor and optional demonstrates either profound medical ignorance or willful disregard for suffering. Either way, these aren't people I want representing our hospital system. What are you recommending? Contract non-renewal for both, effective at current contract period end. 60 days to find other employment. They're ineligible for rehire in any network capacity. Not termination for cause, so full benefits through contract end, but we're not keeping them. Dorothy, I need you to be sure. These are my parents. I don't want anyone thinking I'm being vindictive. Jessica, if these were any 2 employees who behaved this way toward a family member's life-threatening emergency, I'd make the same decision. Hospitals need employees who understand compassion, who value human life, who recognize medical emergencies. Your parents failed that basic test. The non-renewal notices were issued Friday, May 12th, 10 days before Tyler's graduation. My phone exploded. 34 missed calls from my mother. 18 from my father. 47 texts from confused to furious. My mother's voicemail. Jessica Lynn Morrison, what the hell did you do? We both got non-renewal notices. They're letting us go. After 8 years, after 10 years. And we know it was you. How could you destroy your own parents' careers because you're petty and vindictive? We're losing our health insurance, our income, everything. Right before Tyler's graduation. You've ruined everything. My father's message, you're dead to us. You're not our daughter anymore. Don't come to graduation. Don't ever contact this family again. Tyler texted, seriously? You got mom and dad fired right before my graduation? What the fuck is wrong with you? I didn't respond. Dorothy called next morning. Your parents filed a complaint alleging you abused your position for personal retaliation. What happens now? Standard investigation. Robert Brennan is handling it personally. The investigation took 3 days. Robert interviewed Dorothy, reviewed all documentation, spoke with Dr. Holland about my medical condition, interviewed Monica, and pulled security footage showing my parents never visited during my 8-day stay despite working in the same network. He called Tuesday. The investigation is complete. The non-renewal decision stands. Your parents' complaint is dismissed. On what grounds? Their behavior genuinely demonstrated lack of basic compassion and medical understanding incompatible with hospital employment. The decision would have been the same regardless of your involvement. Several people we interviewed expressed shock that your parents could work in healthcare and show such callous disregard for a life-threatening emergency. Thank you. One more thing. Your parents have been telling people, including other employees, that you got them fired out of spite. That's creating workplace disruption and damaging your professional reputation. Dorothy issued a cease and desist notification that further defamatory statements will result in forfeiture of remaining benefits and potential legal action. My parents stopped calling. I didn't attend Tyler's graduation ceremony or party. I was still recovering, still on antibiotics, barely able to stand for extended periods. But word got back through Monica. My parents spent the party telling everyone I'd vindicatively destroyed their careers, because they'd taken a vacation. Until a physician who worked at Mercy General asked about the vacation. My mother, emboldened by wine, told the whole story. The midnight call about stomach pain. How they couldn't cancel their expensive cruise for a minor procedure. How I'd been overdramatic about simple appendix surgery. The physician, Dr. Anthony Chin, went still. A ruptured appendix with peritonitis? That's what your daughter had. She made it sound worse. A ruptured appendix with peritonitis is a surgical emergency with significant mortality risk. Did you know she was hospitalized 8 days? Did you know she had severe septic complications? She exaggerates everything. Dr. Chin said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Your daughter almost died from septic shock and you went on a cruise. You work in a hospital and you called a life-threatening surgical emergency minor. Do you understand how profoundly wrong that is? Now you're surprised the hospital system didn't want employees who demonstrate that level of medical ignorance and lack of compassion? You're not victims. You're exactly the kind of people who shouldn't be working in healthcare. He left. So did several other medical professionals. Tyler's celebration dissolved into chaos. Tyler blamed me for ruining his party, even though I wasn't there. I blocked his number after he called me a vindictive bitch. My parents' 60-day contract period ended in July. They left Metropolitan Hospital Network. My mother found medical billing work at a private practice. My father got commercial building maintenance work, not healthcare related. Word spreads in medical communities. Those are the people who went on a cruise while their daughter had emergency surgery, became a story that made rounds. Their reputations were permanently damaged by their own actions. I recovered fully by August. The scars faded. I returned to work full-time. Dorothy called me in one day. Since your parents' non-renewal, we've received 3 reports from their former colleagues who witnessed similar dismissive behavior toward patients and family members. Nothing formal but a pattern of callousness that made people uncomfortable. We made the right decision. Thank you for telling me. You did nothing wrong. You flagged a legitimate concern, recused yourself, and let the process work properly. That takes integrity. I ran into Dr. Holland 6 months later. Jessica, you look wonderful. Fully recovered. Fully recovered. Thank you for saving my life. I'm sorry your family wasn't there. I'm not. I learned who my real family is. Monica, my colleagues, people like you who actually cared whether I lived or died. He smiled. For what it's worth, I heard about your parents' employment. The hospital made the right choice. Compassion isn't optional in healthcare. It's fundamental. I'm 28 now, healthy, thriving, completely estranged from my parents and brother. They send nothing. I've heard through distant relatives they blame me for ruining their lives. But I didn't ruin their lives. I survived despite their neglect, and I ensured they couldn't continue working where compassion and patient-centered care were core values. They called my emergency surgery optional. They called my life-threatening condition minor. They chose a Caribbean cruise over their daughter's survival. The hospital chose not to employ people who demonstrate that level of callousness. That wasn't vindictive. That was accountability. My appendix scar has faded. My relationship with my biological family is gone. And I'm okay with both. Because some procedures aren't optional. Some infections spread. Some families are toxic. And some decisions, no matter how difficult, are absolutely right.
The Legion Hall glowed under tired neon, its windows fogged with breath and February cold. Pickup trucks filled the gravel lot, and the hum of small-town pride spilled through the double doors. Inside, laughter rolled over sheet cakes and folding chairs, Graham's voice carrying above it all like he owned the place. I parked at the far end, quilt folded on the passenger seat, a small envelope tucked beside it. The plan was simple: drop both with Paula at the check-in table, offer a quick birthday word, and head back to Aunt Ruth's before anyone noticed me. The door swung heavy as I stepped in. Paula's smile flickered, then settled into something apologetic. Before she could reach for the quilt, Graham cut across the room, his boots clicking against scuffed tile. He clapped a banker on the shoulder, nodded at the football coach, then planted himself between me and the table. "Only important people are invited," he said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. The grin on his face looked easy, but his eyes carried the sharp edge I'd known since childhood. "Not you." The words hit like a cold gust through my chest. I held the quilt tighter, the envelope pressing into my palm. Paula's hand hovered in midair, unsure if she should take them or step back. I drew a steady breath, the kind the army trained into me, and let my eyes trace the floor instead of his smirk. No fight, no scene. That was the plan. I shifted the quilt under my arm and turned toward the exit, the sound of the band tuning up already swallowing me as the door loomed closer. That was when a hand caught my sleeve. The grip was firm, steady, nothing like Graham's swaggering gestures. I turned, and the first thing I saw was the flash of silver against dark blue, the bars, the ribbons, the weight of service that needed no introduction. General Caroline Hartley stood there, gloved hand still resting on my arm, eyes clear and calm as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carrying with no effort. "This way." It wasn't loud, but the room stilled. Chairs squeaked as people turned. Conversations cut mid-laugh. Whispers rose at the edges, the kind that travel faster than sound. Graham froze. His smirk slid just enough for me to see the crack. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, much less a 4-star general standing in full dress uniform under the buzzing Legion lights. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not pride exactly, but the weight of being seen when I hadn't asked for it. My instinct was to shake my head, retreat, slip back into the quiet I'd planned, but the general's hand stayed on my sleeve, her grip gentle but unyielding, like she was anchoring me against the undertow of my own hesitation. Paula at the check-in table straightened her glasses. The banker cleared his throat. Coach Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The small-town hierarchy Graham had built around himself wavered as eyes swung from him to me. I wanted to say, "This isn't necessary." I wanted to slip out into the cold air, back to the car, back to the quilt and envelope waiting for a quieter handoff, but the general had already started forward, and the space between us and the microphone stretched open like a runway. I could feel the draft of Graham's stare on the back of my neck as the general guided me toward the center of the hall. Walking beside General Hartley, my mind slipped backward, pulled by the familiar heat of Graham's stare. It was the same weight I'd felt in Athens, Ohio, long before uniforms and orders, back when Friday nights were lit by stadium lights and the town swarmed the bleachers. Graham was the star, the one in shoulder pads and a gleaming helmet, the quarterback who carried our family name across the loudspeakers. Winslow with the pass, Winslow with the win. Coaches clapped his back, teachers bent rules for him, and neighbors swore he was bound for something larger than Athens could hold. I stood at the edge of the field with medical tape and ice packs. Student trainer, they called it, though most people just saw me as helpful. When Graham scored, the crowd roared. When I wrapped a sprain, no one noticed unless it meant the star could play again. At home, our mother tried to level the scales in small ways. She slid me the better cut of pot roast when Graham wasn't looking, pressed her palm against mine after another of his celebrations, and whispered, "Do things right when nobody's clapping." She said it like a blessing, like a commandment, but Graham didn't see it that way. He carried his victories like armor, loud and polished, and he wanted me small enough to fit in the shadows they cast. If I raised my voice, he drowned it in laughter. If I did well in class, he called it luck. Over time, I learned silence. It was easier to swallow the sting than to invite another round of reminders that I wasn't the important Winslow. Those years stacked up, one unnoticed moment on another, until my life tilted toward leaving. I enlisted at 19 not just to serve but to breathe somewhere Graham's shadow couldn't follow. Yet here, in the Legion Hall decades later, I felt how deep those roots ran, how easily he still reached for the same weapon of dismissal. The general's hand steadied me, and I let my breath fall into rhythm with her stride as we moved closer to the waiting microphone. At 19, I boarded a bus out of Athens with a duffel bag and a contract signed behind the Kroger parking lot. Lackland Air Force Base in Texas greeted me with heat that clung to skin and the constant bark of cadence. I learned quickly that the world didn't care whose sister I was. It cared if I could run, carry weight, and keep my head steady when others lost theirs. Medical training pulled me in. We learned to stop bleeding with hands that shook, to read vital signs by instinct when monitors failed, and to build order out of chaos. The first time I knelt in the dust under rotors, my palms pressed against a young private's wound, I felt fear claw through me. But training took over. Breathe, check, act. My voice came out calm when nothing else inside me was. He lived, and that steadiness lodged itself in me like a compass. I wrote home in short, careful letters. Mom answered with recipes scribbled in the margins, news from the church, notes about the dog getting old. She never missed a chance to remind me you're doing the right thing, even if no one claps. Graham didn't write. When I came home on leave, he looked me over once and said, "You look scrawny." You sure they don't just have you playing nurse? That was his way shrinking me, so his own story stayed large. I stopped expecting anything different. It was during a late rotation in San Antonio when then Colonel Caroline Hartley first noticed me. She'd watched me steady a room full of trainees, pulling them back into rhythm when panic threatened to spread. Later, she found me by the water jugs and said, "You make people do the right thing in a way that feels like their idea. Have you thought about a commission?" I told her money was tight, that I wasn't sure I was the type. She gave me a look that saw past excuses. That night, I lay awake realizing someone beyond Mom believed I was more than background. Her voice returned to me now as the general's hand guided me closer to the microphone. When the call came, I was halfway through a night shift in Germany. The Red Cross message was blunt. My mother's scans had come back wrong, and the doctors were already using words that hung heavy metastatic, aggressive, limited options. I signed the emergency leave paperwork with a hand that barely recognized my own name and boarded a plane home. The farmhouse smelled of lemon polish and broth when I walked in. Mom sat wrapped in a quilt, thinner than I remembered, but her smile lifted the room. "Don't hover," she warned, even as she reached for my hand. For weeks. I sat beside her, holding teacups she could no longer steady, reading psalms when her voice tired, measuring out medicines on the kitchen counter. Graham avoided the silence of those hours. Instead, he made himself louder in town hosting fish fries, talking about expansion plans for his business, telling anyone who'd listen how the Winslow name meant leadership. He stopped by the farmhouse, but always with an audience, as if grief could be managed with showmanship. One night, when it was just the two of us in the kitchen, Mom pressed my fingers around hers. Her grip was weaker, but her eyes cut clear. "Don't let your brother make you small," she whispered. "Promise me." I nodded, even though I didn't know then how often I'd have to repeat those words back to myself. She passed on a Thursday morning with rain tapping the roof. Aunt Ruth and I at her side. The funeral filled the church, casseroles stacked high in the fellowship hall. People hugged me, murmured thanks for my service. But when Graham spoke, he steered every story back to himself, how he stayed strong, how he carried the family, how he kept Mom's pride alive. When someone asked about my work, he chuckled and said, "Alara's good at helping. But you know, the important stuff happens here at home." The words stung less for their meaning than for their familiarity. It was the same script he'd read since we were kids, just rewritten for a grieving audience. I stood there, hearing Mom's voice steady in memory, and felt a line draw itself sharp inside me. That line stayed as I packed my uniform again. Orders waiting. Duty pulling me forward. 2 weeks before Graham's party. I stood in a small auditorium at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Ohio flag and the stars and stripes standing stiff behind me. A handful of colleagues clapped as the orders were read promotion to Colonel 06. The pinning felt quiet, almost private, the kind of ceremony I preferred. No speeches, no cameras, just the weight of new rank and the steady grip of General Hartley's hand when she said, "You've earned every inch of this." I drove home to Athens with that moment folded deep inside me, not for Graham, not for the town, but for myself and for Mom. Still, I couldn't ignore the message floating across social media, Winslow VIP celebration invitation only. Graham's name stamped across banners like a campaign. The timing wasn't lost on me. At Aunt Ruth's house, I pulled out the banker's box I'd packed for the trip. Inside lay the markers of a different kind of importance, a folded flag from a change of command, a redacted copy of my DD-214, a photograph of me pressing my hand against a young soldier's sternum while the medevac crew blurred in the background, and the challenge coin I'd carried since my first deployment, On top rested the scholarship paperwork in Mom's name, the seed for something she would have been proud of, a fund for local students from military families. My plan was simple. Slip the envelope with the paperwork and the gift card into Paula's hands at the VA clinic table, leave the quilt folded on the stack for auction, and be gone before the band finished its first song. No speeches, no announcements, no reason for Graham to twist it into his narrative. That was the plan I carried with me as I buttoned my blues that evening. The fabric stiff with starch and memory, the ribbons aligned by a transparent ruler only people like me kept. I told myself I was there for Mom, nothing more. But plans don't always survive contact with the world. And as I walked through the Legion doors, quilt tucked under my arm, I had no idea the quiet exit I'd mapped out would dissolve the moment a gloved hand found my sleeve. General Hartley's hand didn't release me until we reached the front of the hall. Mr. Tate, the Legion commander, stepped to the microphone, his gravel voice steadying the air. Folks, let's hold a moment. Pastor Miller, never far from ceremony, moved closer, his Bible tucked under one arm as though even he felt the weight of what was about to unfold. General Hartley stood tall, silver stars catching the neon. She unfolded a single page and read with the calm cadence of someone who knew exactly how to command a room. By order of the United States Air Force Personnel Center, Colonel Alara Winslow is recognized for sustained superior performance in medical operations and leadership under pressure. Her words rolled across the tables, softening even the clatter of forks. A ripple moved through the crowd. I caught Paula's eyes. She had slipped in with the banker's box I'd left in my car. She set it on a small table by the bandstand, arranging the folded flag, the photo, the DD-214, and Mom's scholarship paperwork. It wasn't spectacle. It was evidence that I hadn't come empty-handed, that I had always intended to honor quietly. The general had only lifted the curtain. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Hartley turned to Graham. Mr. Winslow, would you help place one eagle on your sister's shoulder? His face flickered, first confusion, then resistance, and finally something pale that looked like fear. But with the whole town watching, he stepped forward. His hand trembled as he fixed the insignia in place, his smile stiff and hollow. For once, he had no line ready to turn me small. Applause broke cautiously, then steadier, filling the Legion Hall in a way I had never known in Athens. I stood straighter, not for Graham's sake, but for Mom's, for the woman who told me not to let him diminish me. The general gave a small nod, her eyes locking with mine as if to say the work was done, but as the crowd leaned in, I knew this reckoning was only the beginning, and the aftershock would come once the clapping faded. When the applause finally softened, people began to approach me one by one. Old veterans with caps pulled low pressed my hand. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years nodded, their eyes bright with something closer to respect than curiosity. Paula reached me last, her fingers warm around mine. Feels like air returning, she whispered, her voice breaking. And for a moment, I thought of Mom standing beside her, nodding in agreement. I stood through the handshakes and the congratulations until the room shifted back into the rhythm of sheet cake and small talk. The band tested chords again, and the clink of coffee cups filled the silence left behind. I slipped out into the night air, the cold sharp against my skin, my body craving the quiet more than the attention. Graham followed, his boots scuffing the gravel. He carried the smile he wore when he wanted something, not when he was proud. "We should get a picture," he said, "something for Facebook. Show folks we're good." I studied his face, the way his jaw tensed, the way his eyes darted as if already imagining how he'd caption it. "No," I said, steady. "Let it be what it was." His smile faltered. For a moment, I thought he might argue, press the point until it became another of his performances. Instead, he shifted his weight, muttered something about needing to check on the band, and turned back toward the hall. I let the cold sink deeper, the quiet steadier than the applause had been. For once, I didn't feel the urge to rescue him from embarrassment, to smooth over the edges for the sake of peace. The line I'd carried since Mom's last words held firm. I drew a breath and headed toward Aunt Ruth's porch light, already glowing in the distance, ready to tell her how the night had unfolded. Aunt Ruth was waiting on her porch when I came up the steps, her mug steaming in the February night. She listened without interrupting as I told her what had happened at the Legion, the silence, the general, Graham's forced smile. When I finished, she reached across the armrest and squeezed my hand. "Boundaries aren't walls," she said. "They're fences with gates you open on purpose. You get to decide who comes through." The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery. Frost clung to the grass, and the maple branches rattled in the wind. I knelt by Mom's headstone, brushed away the leaves, and set my challenge coin at the base. The metal looked small against the stone but steady, like it belonged there. "I did what you asked," I murmured. I didn't let him make me small. Gravel crunched behind me. Graham's truck door slammed, and a moment later he was standing awkwardly at the edge of the plot. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. Arms crossed. I was making a point. I rose and faced him. "Points make holes," I said. "You've been driving them into me for years." His eyes flickered, searching for the joke he usually leaned on, but none came. "I just thought he began." "You thought wrong." I cut in. No more staged photos. No more performances. Respect or distance. That's the choice. He shifted, jaw tight, but I didn't move to fill the silence or soften the edges. For once, I let him sit in the discomfort of his own words. I touched the stone again, then walked back toward my car, the cold air bracing and clear, carrying me forward into what waited next. 2 weeks later, I stood in Lancaster as the city crew set potted mums along the new Gold Star walkway. Families gathered beneath the maples, names carved into stone shining under the winter sun. General Hartley was there, steady as always. Her presence a reminder that service carries farther than hometown borders. She clasped my shoulder once, then moved down the line to speak with the mothers and fathers who carried heavier burdens than mine. The next Friday night, the stadium lights flickered on at Athens High. At halftime, the school board stepped forward, a plain folder in hand. They announced the first scholarship in Mom's name, small in dollar amount, but vast in what it meant, a recognition that quiet lives can echo, that sacrifice doesn't need a stage to matter. The crowd clapped, and I pictured Mom in her kitchen, telling me again to do things right even when nobody claps. Driving back toward Dayton, the road stretched clean under a pale sky. The fields opened wide, empty now, but waiting for spring. I rolled the window down, the cold air filling my chest with something that felt freer than triumph. Importance wasn't Graham's guest list or the titles he flashed in town. Importance was steadiness, the long obedience to what is right, carried out without applause until the day someone finally notices. I tightened my grip on the wheel, the horizon straight ahead, knowing that the work would continue whether the world watched or not. The first thing that struck me was the smell, sharp, metallic, like the ink from freshly signed checks. It clung to the papers littering the carpet in the guest room where my brother had been staying. I bent down and picked one up. A withdrawal slip. My signature, only it wasn't mine. The numbers blurred as my eyes locked on the figure $20,000. Another slip lay beneath it, this one for $35,000. My throat tightened as I gathered them into trembling hands. The room was stripped bare. The suitcase I'd seen in the corner last night was gone. Drawers gaped open, clothes missing, even the photo frames I'd left on the dresser snapshots of us as kids at Cannon Beach. Our parents smiling in the background were empty, their glass fronts catching the morning light but showing nothing behind them. On the pillow, I found the note, scrawled in my brother's handwriting. The words were hurried but unmistakable. "Sorry, Selena. Cassandra says we need a fresh start. Don't look for us." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress still dented from where he'd slept. Dorian was 41 years old, yet he had vanished like a teenager sneaking out after curfew, only he had taken more than curfew hours. He had taken nearly everything. I pressed the forged slips to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't some petty theft. It was a betrayal carved with my own name, in ink I hadn't touched. From downstairs came the faint sound of footsteps, lighter and quicker than an adult's. My son Rowan was awake, and I knew in moments he would see the wreckage left behind. Mom Rowan's voice came from the doorway, thin but steady. He stood there in his rumpled t-shirt, his hair still mussed from sleep. His eyes swept across the mess of papers in my lap and the empty drawers behind me. What happened? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck. How could I tell my 12-year-old that his uncle had stolen everything I fumbled for an answer? But Rowan stepped into the room before I could speak. He crouched beside me, studying the slips in my hands. For a moment, I braced myself for the tears, the panic. Instead, a strange calm spread across his face. He smiled. "Mom, don't worry. I handled it." I stared at him. "What do you mean, handled it?" Rowan pulled a phone from his pocket. Not his old scratched-up one, but a sleek black device I didn't recognize. With a few swipes, he showed me a profile picture from a database I had never seen before. Beneath the photo, the name read, Catherine Voss. Warrants in 3 states, charges ranging from fraud to assault. "That's Cassandra," Rowan said matter-of-factly. "Your brother's girlfriend, not who she says she is." My mouth went dry. "How could you possibly? I've been watching him," Rowan interrupted, his tone disturbingly mature. He thought his late-night calls were secret. I tracked his phone. I copied his texts. Once I saw her name wasn't real, I dug deeper. Public records are public. Mom, you just have to know where to look. I gripped the edge of the bed to steady myself. My son, who still left Legos scattered across the living room floor, was talking like a private investigator. His small fingers scrolled through documents, arrest reports, addresses. He looked up at me with a certainty I couldn't quite meet. "It's all taken care of. Uncle Dorian isn't as clever as he thinks." Relief flickered through me, tangled with unease. Before I could form a response, a sharp knock echoed from the front door downstairs. The knock came again, firmer this time. I forced my legs to carry me downstairs, Rowan trailing close behind. Through the glass pane, I saw 2 officers waiting on the porch, their uniforms crisp against the gray Portland morning. "Mrs. Marlowe, the taller one, asked when I opened the door. His voice was professional but not unkind. "I'm Detective Halverson. This is Officer Diaz. May we come in?" My stomach clenched. I stepped aside, motioning them toward the living room. Rowan sank into the armchair, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. Halverson pulled a folder from under his arm and opened it on the coffee table. "We received a tip early this morning. Your brother, Dorian Marlowe, was apprehended at a gas station off I-5 about 40 miles south. He was with a woman identified as Catherine Voss." The name landed like a stone. I flicked a glance at Rowan, whose expression didn't change. Diaz slid photographs across to me. Grainy surveillance images of Dorian withdrawing cash from ATMs, Catherine at his side. Bank records printed with my forged signature. Text message transcripts planning their escape. The evidence was overwhelming. I pressed my hand to my mouth. "Oh, God," I whispered, the words true in their shock if not in their surprise. Halverson softened his tone. "The funds have been recovered. We'll need you to verify the withdrawals weren't authorized, but it looks like you'll get most of your money back." I nodded quickly, pretending to study the papers while my mind spun. The tip they spoke of it wasn't anonymous at all. It was Rowan. My 12-year-old had fed the authorities everything they needed. I forced my voice steady. "I didn't know he was capable of this. I never imagined we understand," Halverson said, closing the folder. "Someone was looking out for you." Rowan shifted slightly in his chair, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Before I could react, the phone on the end table rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence. The phone's shrill ring had barely faded when I picked it up, my hand shaking. "Hello!" A rush of static. Then Dorian's voice, raw and desperate. "Selena, it's me. Don't hang up. Please." I swallowed hard. "Where are you, County Jail?" They got us. Catherine and me." But listen, this wasn't random. Someone set me up. Someone close. They knew everything en route, the withdrawals, even the burner phone. Who else could have known that? Who? I closed my eyes, staring at the folder of evidence still lying on the coffee table. My son sat a few feet away, quiet as a shadow, his gaze fixed on me. "Dorian," I managed. "You made your choices. You signed my name. You stole from me. I was going to pay it back," he said quickly, words tripping over themselves. "She told me it was an investment, a chance to finally fix everything. But someone wanted me to fall. Cassandra's dangerous. But this, it's bigger than her." My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to demand details, to ask him what exactly he meant. But Rowan shifted in the chair, tilting his head slightly, watching me. "I don't know anything," I said at last, my voice thin but firm. "You'll have to deal with the consequences." A long pause, then the sound of him exhaling hard. "You don't get it. They're playing a game with me. With us. Be careful." The line went dead. I lowered the receiver slowly, my palm damp with sweat. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Rowan leaned back, crossing one leg over the other in a gesture far too adult. "Maybe she betrayed him," he said, almost lightly. "Criminals eat their own." The simplicity of the suggestion should have comforted me, but instead it rooted itself deep inside my chest, cold and heavy, as the afternoon light shifted across the floorboards. That evening, after the police had gone and the house felt too quiet, I found Rowan at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of him. His pen moved steadily across the page, his brows knit in concentration. He didn't notice me lingering in the doorway. "Homework?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head without looking up. "A letter. For Uncle Dorian." I think it might help him. I wanted to tell him not to bother, that Dorian didn't deserve a single word, but Rowan's tone was calm, purposeful. I left him to it, though unease prickled along my skin. Later, when he'd gone upstairs, I found the letter on the counter, neatly folded with Uncle written across the front. My better judgment told me to leave it alone, but my hands moved on their own. I unfolded the page and began to read. The handwriting was careful, almost adult, and the words cut sharper than I expected. "Dear Uncle Dorian, I forgive you for stealing from us. I forgive you for choosing a criminal over your family. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Prison has rules. You never liked rules, but maybe they'll finally teach you. You belong there, because out here you only hurt the people who care about you." I felt my chest tighten. The next lines chilled me even more. "If you ever try to come back and hurt Mom or Grandma again, if you even think about taking from us, I'll finish what you started. You tied your own noose when you forged her name. I'll just make sure it holds." I lowered the letter, my hands trembling. The words weren't written by a 12-year-old boy. They were crafted by someone who understood how to wound, how to dominate. Forgiveness cloaked in threat, mercy sharpened into a blade. Awe and terror wrestled inside me. This was my son, my sweet boy who still asked for an extra blanket at night. Yet here he was, shaping sentences like a man who had studied cruelty. I refolded the paper, slid it back where I found it, and pressed my palms against the counter to steady myself. Upstairs. I heard Rowan's door close, and in the silence that followed, the knock at the front door returned, heavier than before. The pounding at the door came just as I was slipping Rowan's letter back onto the counter. I startled, clutching the edge of the sink to steady myself. When I opened the door, A woman in a navy blazer introduced herself with brisk efficiency. Jennifer Walsh, Child Protective Services. May I come in? My throat went dry. Of course. I managed stepping aside. She carried a clipboard, her smile professional but sharp. We received a report expressing concerns about your son's well-being. With your brother's recent arrest, it's routine we follow up. I glanced at Rowan, who had appeared at the top of the stairs. He came down slowly, polite as ever, and offered his hand with a composure that made him look years older. Good afternoon, ma'am. Jennifer seemed impressed. Polite, too. That's nice to see. She asked to see his room. I braced myself, but Rowan opened the door with a flourish. Everything was immaculate bed made. Books stacked by subject, clothes folded in drawers. His laptop sat closed on the desk, a row of sharpened pencils beside it. Jennifer made notes, nodding, spotless. You should be proud, Mrs. Marlowe. Rowan answered her questions with practiced ease about school, friends, how he was coping with his uncle's arrest. He spoke with balance, never defensive, never rehearsed, just enough detail to sound natural. Sometimes I feel sad, he admitted softly, but Mom always makes sure I'm okay. Jennifer's face softened. That's a very healthy way of putting it. By the time she finished, she was practically glowing. Your son is one of the most well-adjusted children I've met in these circumstances. I'll file a positive report. Likely no further follow-up will be needed. I forced a smile, thanked her, and saw her out. The moment the door closed, Rowan turned to me with a small, satisfied grin. Easy, he said, heading toward the kitchen as though nothing had happened. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart thudding, the echo of Jennifer's praise still ringing in my ears. Outside, the world saw perfection. Inside, I could feel suspicion rooting deeper, and it only grew stronger when the phone rang again, flashing the county jail's number across the screen. The phone rang just after midnight, its shrill tone slicing through the silence of the house. I fumbled for it on the nightstand, and a clipped voice on the other end told me my brother had been rushed from the jail to the hospital. When I arrived, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, humming above the sterile hallway. A nurse led me to his room. Dorian lay on the bed, his skin pale, the bruises on his neck dark and raw. For a moment, I saw only the boy he once was, reckless but laughing. Always pulling me into trouble, and then the man who had emptied my accounts came rushing back. His eyelids fluttered open. Selena, he rasped, every word scraping his throat. You have to listen. Watch your boy. He watched me. I gripped the rail of his bed, trying to steady myself. You're weak. You need to rest. No, he whispered fiercely. Rowan. He knew everything, before I even acted. He knew. Cassandra said he gave her chills, like he could see through her. The door creaked, and our mother, Martha, hurried in. She clutched her handbag against her chest like armor, her eyes already glistening with tears. She went straight to Dorian's side, smoothing his hair with shaking hands. Don't start with that, she said sharply. You betrayed us. Dorian, don't drag Rowan into your guilt. He's a good boy, the only good thing left. Dorian's gaze locked on mine, desperate and pleading. Please, just watch him. I gave a small nod, though my throat felt tight with words I couldn't speak. Martha tugged gently at my arm. Let's go. He needs sleep, not more lies. We stepped out into the night air, but Dorian's voice clung to me. Faint and broken, watch your boy. It echoed all the way home, louder than the hum of the tires on the empty road, and it followed me as I unlocked the front door where the house was waiting in silence. By the time we returned home from the hospital, the house was silent, but my nerves were raw. I hadn't even taken off my coat when the phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me knew before I answered. Selena. A woman's voice hissed, sharp and venomous. It's Catherine, or should I say, Catherine Voss. You think you're clever, don't you? I know who tipped the police. It wasn't luck. And if you don't want me telling your brother the truth, you'd better. The phone was plucked from my hand before she could finish. Rowan, suddenly at my side, pressed the receiver to his ear. His voice was steady, almost amused. If you really knew anything, you wouldn't be calling from a burner in the middle of the night. You'd be running. Which, by the way, you should be. There was a pause on the other end, then a muffled curse before the line went dead. Rowan handed the phone back, his expression smooth. She's bluffing, Mom. Scammers always try to scare you. It's what they do best. I nodded, though my pulse still raced. How did you know it was her? He shrugged lightly. Too lightly. Who else would call? Don't worry, she's got nothing. But for the briefest moment, just before the mask slid back into place, I caught at something flickering in his eyes. Panic. Not long, not loud, just a flash like lightning behind a storm. Then it was gone, replaced with the calm confidence he always wore. See? Rowan smiled, already moving toward the kitchen, handled. I stood frozen in the hallway, phone heavy in my hand, the silence pressing in. Upstairs. The floor creaked as he climbed the steps, and I realized I wasn't sure if the sound comforted me or made the walls feel thinner. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I wandered into the kitchen, restless, unable to shake Catherine's voice from my mind. On the counter sat Rowan's notebook, half buried under a stack of mail. I pulled it free, meaning only to tidy, but the page fell open on its own. It wasn't homework. It was a chessboard drawn in neat squares, each piece carefully sketched. The pawns had been advanced across the board, every one of them promoted into queens. The king, cornered, had no escape. A chill worked through me. Find something interesting. Rowan's voice came from the doorway. He strolled in, bare feet silent on the tile, his expression unreadable. I held the notebook up. What is this? He tilted his head, studying me. It's strategy. Mom. Endgame positions. Pawns aren't weak if they keep moving forward. His eyes glinted. Family is what you protect, not what you forgive. I set the notebook down, forcing my voice steady. Rowan, you're 12. You're not supposed to carry the weight of everyone's sins on your shoulders. You need to talk to someone, a counselor. There have to be limits. For the first time, his mask faltered, just slightly. He looked at me, something hard flickering beneath the surface, and then he smiled with practiced ease. If that's what you want, sure. I'll go. I'll say all the right things. That's not what I meant, I said quickly. I want you to be honest, to feel like a kid again. His smile lingered, but his words cut through me like glass. I can do that, Mom, as long as no one threatens us again. The casual tone made my chest tighten because I knew it wasn't a promise, it was a condition. I gathered the notebook and slid it into a drawer, my hands trembling, while Rowan poured himself a glass of milk as if nothing had been said. The sound of the front door opening broke the silence, and my mother's weary voice carried down the hallway. The next morning, the smell of pancakes drifted through the house. I padded into the kitchen to find Rowan at the stove, flipping golden circles onto a plate while my mother sat at the table, beaming as though nothing in our world had cracked. He looked every bit the boy he was supposed to be, bare feet. Messy hair, humming off key. Good morning. Mom, he said, sliding a plate toward me. Coffee's ready too. I forced a smile, but the night before pressed heavy in my chest. At dawn. The hospital had called. Dorian wanted me to come. His voice was broken, pleading. Tell the truth about Rowan, he begged. Please, Selena, before it's too late. I sat at his bedside, hearing the same desperate refrain he had whispered before. But as I looked at him defeated, chained by his own choices, I realized that exposing Rowan would not save him. It would only tear apart what little remained of our family, back home. I carried Rowan's letter upstairs and slid it into the fireproof safe where we kept birth certificates and insurance papers. I turned the key slowly, the click of the lock sounding final. The letter would stay hidden, just like the truth. When I returned to the kitchen, Rowan was already seated, passing syrup to Grandma with a polite grin. His eyes flicked to mine, steady and unreadable, and then he smiled wide, innocent, the picture of any 12-year-old boy. I sat down across from him, the taste of pancakes turning to ash in my mouth, and told myself silence was protection, even as I wondered what game my son might be playing next. The clink of silverware against china filled the dining room, blending with the soft hum of conversation and the scent of Mom's glazed ham. Lilies stood tall in the center of the table, their perfume mixing with the tang of Dad's bourbon cocktails. Easter at my parents' house had always been more performance than gathering, a time for Brennan to polish his resume in front of a captive audience. He leaned back in his chair, designer watch catching the chandelier's glow. Tech Fusion just promoted me to senior manager in enterprise solutions, he announced, pausing long enough for the relatives to murmur their approval. It's a tough industry. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. His eyes slid across the table until they locked on mine. The comment hung there, obvious enough that even Aunt Clara lowered her fork. A few chuckles broke the silence, the kind that pretended to be harmless but landed sharp. Heat climbed my neck, but I kept my face steady, fingers tightening around my napkin. I'd been through this ritual before Brennan's victory laps, my muted role as the family's creative experiment. I looked down at the plate, at the honey-glazed carrots that suddenly tasted bitter. Around me, the conversation picked up again, people carefully steering away from me as if silence were safer. Mom beamed at Brennan. Dad poured him more wine. I sat still, listening to the rhythm of praise I'd memorized over the years. At the far end, Grandpa Ed cleared his throat softly. He hadn't spoken much all evening, but I saw the glint of his old Hamilton watch as he checked the time. His expression was unreadable, patient in a way that made me wonder if he knew more than he let on. The moment passed, and Brennan resumed holding court. I stayed quiet, though the silence no longer felt like surrender. It felt like waiting. Brennan and I grew up under the same roof, yet the paths laid out for us couldn't have been more different. He was the Golden Boy Honor Roll, Robotics Club, Stanford acceptance letter pinned proudly on the refrigerator. I remember Dad clapping him on the back the day his internship in Palo Alto was confirmed, as if the family's future had been secured in one email. My road looked less polished. I worked the cash register at a retail store in Alhambra by day, and at night I hunched over a beat-up laptop, teaching myself to code with online tutorials and trial and error. Where Brennan had professors and mentors, I had error messages and black coffee. The only applause I ever heard was the quiet ping when my script finally ran without crashing. At family dinners, Mom's favorite refrain was, "Your brother's degree will open every door. You should think about going back to school. Thalia, a real degree gives stability." She meant well, but each word pressed down like a weight. Dad, never eager for conflict, would clear his throat and change the subject, asking if anyone wanted more potatoes. I learned to swallow my explanations and keep my progress tucked away like a secret notebook. Even Grandpa Ed once echoed the chorus. A safe job, Thalia, that's what you want. But years later, when he visited my first office, a windowless room above a Koreatown laundromat, something shifted. He stood in the doorway, listening as I explained how I'd landed my first client, a local food distributor who needed better supply tracking. The space smelled of detergent from below, and my desk was a door balanced on cinder blocks. But Grandpa nodded slowly, taking it all in. From then on, he asked sharper questions, not about degrees or titles, but about contracts, uptime, and cash flow. It was the first time I felt truly seen. And that memory returned to me now as I watched him check his watch at the Easter table, silent but steady, while Brennan held the room with his polished words. The first version of Supply Stream lived in a drafty loft south of Market Street. The paint peeled near the windows, and the old freight elevator rattled each time it carried clients upstairs. But I didn't care. I had a desk, a whiteboard, and a product that, if it worked, could save mid-sized companies from drowning in chaotic spreadsheets. Our first client was a regional food distributor that delivered to restaurants across California. Their inventory records were a mess. Drivers were always behind, and orders kept slipping through the cracks. I worked through nights rewriting code, chasing bugs until the sun came up. When their system finally stabilized under our platform, they sent me a thank you note hand-signed by the owner. That piece of paper meant more to me than any degree. The second client was bigger, a national apparel chain that had outgrown its legacy software. Winning that contract wasn't luck, it was grit. I spent weeks pitching, revising, and proving we could scale. When they signed, I knew Supply Stream wasn't just surviving, it was building momentum. It was around then that Priya joined me, sharp, disciplined, and endlessly patient. She turned my scattered processes into an actual company. She brought in compliance audits, structured hiring, and financial discipline. Together, we navigated investor meetings, not by selling dreams, but by showing data uptime percentages, order accuracy, cost savings for clients. Funding came in because the numbers spoke for themselves. Within a few years, we had offices in 3 countries and over 200 employees. Our platform quietly powered supply chains for companies that most families recognized from grocery store shelves and shopping malls. Yet, back home, I stayed quiet at dinner tables, letting Brennan's voice fill the air while mine remained still. The only one who asked for updates was Grandpa Ed. He'd sit with me at his kitchen table in Altadena, pouring cinnamon tea into chipped mugs, and listen as I explained margins, integration challenges, or client onboarding. He didn't always understand every acronym, but he listened harder than anyone else. And as Brennan's stories grew louder, Grandpa's quiet faith became the anchor I leaned on. Brennan's world looked polished on the surface glass conference rooms in North San Jose, catered lunches, and the Tech Fusion logo stamped proudly on every slide deck. But beneath that shine, his division was struggling. Enterprise Solutions, the unit he managed, had been flat for quarters. Contracts weren't renewing. New deals lagged, and a quiet whisper about restructuring made its way through the office halls. He heard the rumors and side conversations, 2 engineers lingering near the coffee machine, a VP's assistant lowering her voice as she stepped into an elevator. Brennan smiled wider when he walked past, but inside, each word landed heavy. He knew what happened to managers when the numbers slipped. He'd seen one escorted out 2 years earlier, his badge disabled before he reached the parking lot. So Brennan doubled down on the mask. He filled his presentations with acronyms and graphs that trended upward even when reality didn't. He dressed sharper, traded his old sedan for a Tesla, and made sure everyone noticed the new watch on his wrist. The image mattered. If people believed he was indispensable, maybe the numbers wouldn't matter as much. At home, that same mask hardened into arrogance. Family dinners became his stage. He never said my name without attaching some diminutive Thalia's little project, or her side hobby. He convinced himself he was protecting his position by making me look smaller, as though minimizing my work could inflate his. I recognized the pattern. His smugness wasn't just pride, it was armor. He was terrified of being revealed as ordinary, of losing the spotlight that had defined him since childhood. Still, knowing that didn't dull the sting when his laughter cut across a table and made my efforts invisible. Brennan had built his entire identity on being the successful one, the standard bearer of the family. But now, with his division teetering and rumors swirling, the very persona that shielded him began to betray him. A mask meant to project confidence had turned into a cage he couldn't step out of. And while he clung to that cage, I was quietly preparing for the move that would change everything. The news came to us quietly. Buried in an industry report that Priya flagged one morning, Tech Fusion was exploring strategic options for its Enterprise Solutions division. On paper, it was routine corporate speak, but we both understood what it meant. The unit was underperforming. The board wanted to shed the weight. For weeks, I'd forced myself not to think about Brennan's place inside that division, but when Priya slid the report across the table in our Soma office, I couldn't ignore it. "We're perfectly positioned," she said, tapping the line that hinted at restructuring. "Our platform overlaps with half their contracts. If they spin it off, we can absorb and scale." I nodded, heart pounding. It made perfect sense. Our supply chain software had grown lean and efficient while theirs had bloated into legacy systems. Still, I hesitated. "You know what everyone will say if we buy this division. They'll think it's about Brennan." Priya's eyes didn't waver. "Then let them. Business is business. You built a company to solve problems. This is one of them." We began sketching out an offer: retain the engineers, restructure leadership, merge their codebase with ours. Priya handled the financial models while I mapped the integration plan. Meetings with bankers followed, then late-night calls with lawyers who assured us the carve-out was feasible. At night, I drove down to Grandpa's house in Altadena, where cinnamon tea waited on the table. He insisted on role-playing the negotiations, leaning across from me with his machinist's hands folded like a board member. "They'll push you on valuation," he warned. "Stay calm. Numbers don't sweat." When I confessed my fear that this looked like a sibling rivalry dressed up as strategy, he shook his head. "A good deal stands on its own legs. If it happens to rattle your brother, that's not your fault. Don't confuse timing with motive." His words steadied me, but a knot still sat in my chest. Every signature we collected, every draft that circled back from legal, carried the weight of family ties I couldn't completely untangle. By the time due diligence was nearly complete, I realized this wasn't just a transaction. It was a turning point, one I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. And when the closing date landed just before Easter weekend, the collision course with Brennan became impossible to ignore. The final signatures went down on a rainy Friday afternoon in San Francisco. Papers slid across the polished table, pens clicked, and with each signature, the future shifted. Priya and I exchanged a glance relief mixed with disbelief. It was done. SupplyStream now owned TechFusion's Enterprise Solutions division. The press embargo was set for Sunday at 6 p.m. sharp. Until then, silence. Our employees would be briefed Monday morning before the story hit the wires. The bankers and lawyers congratulated us in their practiced tones. But beneath the routine, I felt the thrum of something larger. This wasn't just another deal. It was the one that would collide with my family in ways no spreadsheet could model. That evening, I drove to Altadena. Grandpa was waiting at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of cinnamon tea, steam curling into the air. I laid the paperwork in front of him. He read slowly, lips moving as he traced the lines. When he finished, he tapped his Hamilton wristwatch with a gnarled finger. "Timing is everything," he said. "Don't speak too soon. Let the truth arrive when the clock says it's ready." I trusted him more than anyone. He promised he wouldn't breathe a word until the moment came. Still, the weight of secrecy pressed on me. I wasn't just carrying a business acquisition. I was carrying the knowledge that my brother's world was about to tilt. The next 2 days crawled. I checked the clock constantly, rehearsing answers in my head. If Brennan mocked me again at Easter, if Mom dismissed my work, if Dad poured him wine first, I would have to swallow it all, knowing what lay only hours ahead. When Sunday afternoon came, I loaded the car with a bottle of wine and the lemon tart Mom liked. Driving south along the 5, I watched the road unspool under a hazy spring sky. My chest felt tight, as though each mile carried me closer to an explosion no one else could see. By the time I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street in South Pasadena, the hour hand was inching toward 6, and Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Brennan was in full stride, his voice carrying above the clink of cutlery and the hum of small talk. He gestured with his wine glass, describing the scope of his strategic leadership, the way he had to manage teams under pressure, how only a certain kind of mind could survive in enterprise tech. Relatives nodded along, some clearly lost in the jargon but too polite to admit it. I sat quietly, forcing a smile, my fork moving food around my plate while the second hand of Grandpa's Hamilton watch ticked in my peripheral vision. At 5:59, I felt my chest tighten. By 6:00, Grandpa cleared his throat, a soft sound that drew the table's attention more effectively than Brennan's entire performance. "Brennan," he asked, his tone casual. "Which division did you say you worked in again, Enterprise Solutions?" Brennan replied, his shoulders squaring with pride. "We're basically the backbone of Tech Fusion's revenue stream." Grandpa nodded once, then turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were sharp, unblinking. "Thalia, is that why your company just acquired his—" The room froze. Aunt Clara's spoon slipped, clattering against her plate. Mom's smile faltered. Even the air seemed to pause, thick with confusion. Brennan's head jerked toward me, then down to his phone. His thumb flew across the screen, eyes scanning frantically until they stopped. His face drained of color. The headline glared back at him. "Supply Stream finalizes acquisition of Tech Fusion's Enterprise Solutions division." My name was beneath it. Every pair of eyes shifted to me. I straightened in my chair, heart steady, and spoke clearly. "Yes." "We closed the deal Friday. We'll keep most of the engineers, but the division needed restructuring. Integration begins this week." For the first time, no one interrupted. I described our platform, our client base, the scale we had built facts I had carried quietly for years. Dad set his glass down slowly. Mom's lips parted as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Brennan shoved his chair back, muttered something about needing air, and left the table before dessert. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall. Grandpa leaned back, folding his hands in his lap, the faintest smile crossing his face as the table filled with stunned silence that, for once, felt like recognition. Monday morning, the Soma office buzzed with a different kind of energy. The acquisition had gone public overnight, and our inboxes were overflowing with questions, calendars packed with transition meetings. I arrived early, coffee in hand, to find Brennan already waiting outside my office door. His tie was loose. His hair a little unkempt gone was the polished figure who had lectured at Easter. He stood when I approached, shifting awkwardly. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "All this time, I thought you were just playing at it." I unlocked the door, set my bag down, and gestured for him to sit. "It wasn't play, Brennan. It never was." We talked for a long while. I told him his technical record was strong, that I'd read through his projects and respected his engineering work, but his management style layers of jargon, posturing, fear-driven decisions had to change. If he wanted to stay, he would be treated like anyone else a 30-day assessment, reporting to Priya, with deliverables set in writing. His title didn't shield him, performance would. He nodded slowly, the words sinking in. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just listened. That afternoon, my phone rang. Dad's voice was softer than usual. "I owe you an apology," he said. "We should have supported you the way we did Brennan. I should have tried harder." His words caught me off guard, not because I needed them, but because he finally chose to say them. Later. Mom called too, not with excuses, but with questions about how Supply Stream worked. Her voice carrying genuine curiosity. By evening, I sat in my office, watching the city lights flicker on across the bay. The weight I'd carried for years, the need to prove myself, to be heard, felt lighter. I no longer needed validation from them. The work itself was proof enough. And as the first joint team meeting loomed, I understood that the real challenge wasn't winning recognition. It was leading well now that all eyes were finally on me. Weeks slipped into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first. Brennan came into the office each morning without his usual bravado, slipping into a desk beside Jonah, one of our senior engineers. At first, he struggled. His code reviews came back with red marks. His instinct to manage rather than collaborate rubbed the team the wrong way. But slowly, I watched something shift. He stayed later, fixing bugs himself, asking Jonah for feedback instead of hiding behind jargon. For the first time in years, he was learning instead of performing. At our next family dinner, the air was different. Brennan didn't arrive with a speech rehearsed. He asked questions instead. When I mentioned a new client in passing, Mom leaned forward, eager to understand rather than dismiss. Dad poured drinks evenly, no longer reaching for Brennan's glass first. The hierarchy that had once defined us seemed to be loosening its grip. Grandpa Ed sat quietly through most of the meal, then spoke in his gravelly voice. "Thalia," he said, looking at me with a hint of shame. "I once told you to get a safe job. I was wrong. Took me too long to see it, but I see it now." His words hung in the air, heavier than Brennan's old boasts. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Growth, I realized, wasn't limited by age. Respect was being rebuilt, brick by careful brick, not through headlines or press releases, but through the small ways we spoke to each other, the silences we no longer filled with dismissive laughter. The true victory wasn't that my company's name was printed in TechCrunch, it was that I could finally sit at the table without shrinking. And as I looked around at faces that were learning to see me clearly, I knew the work of rebuilding was only just beginning.